On this episode of the show, I have with me Dave Wollenberg. He is VP of Enterprise Data and Analytics at Scan, and we're going to be talking about the long tail of AI. And we're going to dive into how Dave and his team look at identifying use cases. Experimentation is a very good thing, by the way. And we're going to talk about, should we make long-term investments in AI? What are those muscle memories we should be investing in if we're going to do that? And how do you balance change management and the innovation that's coming? Dave, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. I'm here. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell everyone what you guys do at Scan?
Absolutely. So Scan Health Plan is a Medicare Advantage health plan based in Southern California. So we primarily serve older adults on their healthcare needs. And we operate in 5 states: California, New Mexico, Nevada, Texas, and Nevada.
All right. Very cool. So this conversation, I like it a lot because we're talking about really the long tail of AI, really getting to a point where we can see that value. I talk a lot about, it's funny, it's about my first 6 episodes of the podcast were before anyone wanted to talk about AI, and I was asking about the ROI of AI, and I'm still very curious. But I do think this concept of identifying the long tail of AI, and I guess before we start, when we do talk about that, from your perspective, since a lot of the conversation will be around that, what are you referencing, that long tail?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned people early on weren't sure what the ROI was of AI. I'm sure if you go back far enough in time, people were saying, what's the use case for a computer? What's the use case for the internet? And, I think those questions seem so silly in hindsight because you realize those are just foundational changes to how we work. And so, when I think about AI, it's not just, let me find a couple use cases that we have in the company right now and switch them from manual to AI. It's about realizing that in the long run, all of our jobs are AI use cases. And so how do we make that pivot in terms of how we think of our roles that can increasingly be enabled or supercharged by those AI capabilities?
Awesome. And those use cases, when you're thinking about the business and you're thinking about use cases, I think we've seen the first wave of where does AI fit in, and we've tried to identify some of those low-hanging fruit, some of those opportunities to introduce the technology. When you look at where AI was, could be even further than 2 years ago. We're talking about, the hype around AI that we've seen in the last 2 years because of the LLM, that we've seen come to market. Are you looking at different use cases now than you were a year or 18 months ago?
Absolutely. I think early on, we thought about AI, especially the pre-generative AI world, in the form of machine learning, NLP. Can we make predictions about the future? Can we segment our models using traditional data science? And now increasingly we're thinking about insights, I would say. Like, how can AI really take all this information that we have, which is far beyond what any one person can keep in their head, and really find the diamond in the rough, really figure out how are we going to help our members, which members do we need to most prioritize to reach out to and engage with, given what's going on in their lives. As we think about growth as a company, where are the markets that we may want to expand into beyond where we are today? And, a lot of that is not stuff you could have done with traditional machine learning because it involves unstructured data. It involves combining data from various systems that just couldn't be put into features the way traditional ML requires. And so we're really thinking about it, more than just an analysis, but really something that can sit alongside of us. I recently heard our head of HR say in the future, you're going to have human colleagues and you're going to have agent colleagues. Maybe we're not quite there today, but that's the vision of where this is in the future, that the agent might sit alongside you and be a partner in your job.
I like that. Just something that's very interesting that on a side note, I put out some content, and the more I talk about robotics and AI, the more people are worried about the negative implications. And obviously, we're talking about HR style, sitting side by side with an AI. I find it funny because no one hesitates to go Google something, copy and paste it. There's no hesitation that that's happening. But if you say that a system will be proactive in that recommendation, all of a sudden everyone's like, that's my job. And it's like, you do look up stuff. You do go Google stuff. You are always in search of assistance for your job. I mean, unless you're just a master and you never do. Hey, that's fantastic. That's not me. I even know amazing engineers, amazing companies that still look for snippets of code here and there. I find it interesting that people have this feeling towards their jobs and technology being that enabler versus they themselves being that gateway of finding additional information and help.
Yeah, I think this is a tale as old as time, to be honest with you, Amir. And people are so focused on what they're doing today that they think, well, if we took away that task, then I wouldn't have a job left. If I can give an example from another industry, in the pre-internet era, a lot of early lawyers, first-year lawyers, even paralegals, they'd spend a lot of their time in the law library looking up case law, looking up precedent. That was what would consume their time. And then the internet came around and you could find all that stuff on LexisNexis or Westlaw, and a lot of people thought, well, it's not going to be a need for first-year lawyers anymore. But actually, there still are, and those people are, they can bill out ever higher than they could before. So I tend to think that if you can put tools in people's hands that supercharge them, that make them 10 times more capable than they used to be, you're going to want more of those people, not fewer. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we can always predict exactly what they'll be doing in the future. I think the world's going to be changing a lot. I do think some of the tasks we do today will be automated. They'll be made more efficient by AI. But it's not as if there's a certain amount of work to be done in the world. And if you take that work away, there's just nothing left to do. I think on the contrary, when you make people more powerful, they add more value to the business, and therefore you're going to want more, not fewer.
Absolutely. I like the way you use that example of the legal profession, because obviously that is like when we talk about a use case, and if we were to introduce an LLM, an AI to automate some of those things that just require us to go proactively get information, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. When you're looking at obviously your use cases and you're looking at building some of the core muscles required to go out and do this work, is it a case of picking some easy things to go out and try to just build POCs for? Is it tactical in terms of knowing what technical capabilities you're looking to grow and build? I guess, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. In my mind, there's 3 levels of business user who I engage with frequently. So, I'm sure people listening to this podcast are probably using AI every day. They're probably almost sick of hearing about AI. But, there's a lot of people I encounter who almost never use it. And I even hear people ask, what is an LLM? And so, part of what we have to do is just educate people that it is easy to use these tools, and here's how you would use them, publicly available tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. Here's how you'd use them to answer business questions. That's the simplest possible use case, right? The second level of user, knows how to do that, but they're not sure what they are or aren't allowed to do. They say, oh, this is business information. Can I really use a public LLM? We work in a regulated industry, so we're even more careful about this, but I think it's true across all industries. And so for those types of users, it's about setting clear policies on what you can and can't do with publicly available AI. But then the third type of user out there is, familiar with your typical LLM. They use it, they answer questions, but in their mind, that's what AI is. It's about Q&A. It's not any more than that. And for that user, we want to work with them to realize we're at a point now where a non-technical person can start building POCs themselves. They can go quickly build an app that reads our data and answers business questions. This is really, I think, something expansive for most business stakeholders, especially the more non-technical ones, to realize this is about a lot more than just getting your query answered. At our company, we hosted a hackathon this week, and that was a great way to introduce a lot of business users to the idea that this isn't something where you have to be a data scientist or an AI engineer to be getting business value out of AI. It's something where we're at a point where anyone can do it. And even if you don't feel ready to do it in your business context just yet, there are tools online that you can use, vibe coding tools, for example, that anyone can go spin up a free account and just play around with it. Build a little app, just a little passion project. Find something fun that you want to do with it, just to get familiar with the capabilities. So that's sort of how I think about educating people today within the company.
Fantastic. And I guess when you are looking at some of the aspects of AI. And it's funny, some people don't at all really know what AI is going to do for them. Some people use it at home. I think the audience is wide and varied. I think I've made this comparison a couple of times. When the cloud was just taking a foothold a while ago at this point, the thought of that to the end user was immaterial. It didn't matter. They don't care where the application resides. It was a tech-driven wave of change, which shifted jobs and infrastructures and just how work is done. This is a case where the end users are interacting with this technology on a day-to-day basis. We've seen other things as well. Like we've seen when mobile apps first came out and people were like, well, why can't all business apps be, like a Facebook or like whatever, a Pinterest app so easy to use? And then soon they realized, well, because they're not the same products, they're not the same use cases, and the people that try to do that quickly realized it didn't work either. As we're seeing this adoption from a consumer perspective, is this the first time we're really seeing a shift in expectations of stakeholders and technology? And maybe the question in there is, before they wanted the solution, and it was like, we just need X. In your case, I need the dashboard, I need the analytics, I need to see it. It wasn't, oh, by the way, what can we use a ChatGPT type solution to sit on top of the data to get reporting, or hey, I'd love to see what AI could do for me. We're seeing a bit of shift, I feel. Is that what you're seeing?
Absolutely. As people do get exposed to these tools, they want it immediately. They want the ability to ask their question, get their insights, not have to rely on a data and analytics person to run off and do a SQL query or build a dashboard for them. And so there's a lot of excitement about that. So we are in our data modernization phase right now. So you mentioned people migrating to the cloud in the past, and the average business stakeholder not knowing why that was relevant for them. I feel a little bit that way right now as we go from an on-premise SQL server to cloud-based data. I don't think on the surface people understand why that's relevant for them, but as they start seeing these capabilities that are going to get unlocked when that we can put these chatbot-like capabilities, or even spreadsheet-like capabilities, but which allow them to just connect to the underlying data, as if it was Excel, but instead of us pulling the data for them, they can access it all themselves. That's going to be a huge unlock for them, and something I think is really exciting. Now, part of the risk is around role-based access controls, something that we couldn't do on a very fine-grained level back in the on-prem world. And so another big advantage of moving to the cloud, moving to a modern data stack, is the ability to do those fine-grained role-based access controls, even on a column level. And while that might sound very wonky, ultimately what it lets us do is just unlock and democratize so much data, because previously, if you had even just a little bit of sensitive data in a table, you'd have to be very wary about sharing all of it, because we live in a world where personal health information has to be kept as secure as possible. But if we can lock down that data and share the other data, the business data, that just makes so much more available to the business stakeholder and allows us to do more with self-service than we ever could before. So I'm not even sure everyone understands how excited they should be for what's coming, but I think it's going to be a really bright future.
When you mentioned self-service, Bia, I know we've We've been talking about self-service BI for a better part of a few decades. It's the goal. It's the dream for every data professional to not have to go build that report or analytic or dashboard. I guess, are you seeing that in the market now? Is that something that we're still going, you know what, we'll see it as technology advances, as these LLMs get better, stronger, faster, more robust? I guess, where are we in that maturity cycle right now?
Yeah, well, I have no doubt it will continue to get better. I think it's gotten to a pretty good place in terms of the technology, but the technology is only as good as your underlying data stack and the job that you've done to enable that data for the AI. If you don't have clear headers on your data, if you haven't enabled any kind of semantic layer of your data that explains what this is, what a synonym might be for, the name of the data as it currently is labeled, the AI is going to be very limited. And that's not so much a technology limitation. That's just, you haven't done a good job of making the ground truth transparent or clear enough. Even a person wouldn't be able to figure it out, let alone an AI. So as I think about what we need to do to enable this self-service feature, it's not only enabling this technology, it's also that data governance activity as well. Really going through our data, building that semantic layer, as I said, building the key metrics that any AI should pull from, and which has that business stamp of approval of, yes, we agree, this is what the metric means and how you should calculate it. That's as much of a process and business discussion exercise as it is technical, but that's what's going to be crucial for the self-service to actually deliver the results that we want to get out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's 100%. I feel we're on the same page with that. I guess, as you kind of have been talking about, we've talked about the long tail, we've talked about those use cases, we've talked about, what might be with the self-service data access. When you mentioned the HR comment of, hey, somebody might actually have an AI agent side by side as an employee, that kind of change management, that kind of shift in how somebody does work. And I ask this a lot because I actually am completely fascinated with when we take work and we try to re-architect it. And I think from a technology perspective, I actually think we can be very successful. I think the tools will be there. What I'm not 100% sure is, and might be trial and error, is the actual end user, the adoption, and making sure the two, whatever the AI is, and the end user will learn to work with each other. And it's not a case of, when the employee right now feels threatened from a coworker, we all know the political games we can play. Like it's how we survive. It is that, it is not unknown to anyone who's listening to this episode. But when you're dealing with an AI, there is no, I mean, maybe you sabotage it by feeding it bad response. I don't know. But that change management piece of really getting down to re-architecting somebody's work. I mean, you're a technologist, but is that going to fall to you, or is that going to fall to somebody else, you think, when we get to that point?
Great question. Obviously we're not yet at the point of having AI agent coworkers, so there's a lot of unknowns here. But ultimately, whether it's that or just whether it's embracing AI in general, I believe strongly it has to be business-led, technology-enabled. We can't just throw a piece of technology at people and expect them to change how they operate. I think some people are ready for that and excited about it, and some people are either wary or maybe even not aware that it's coming. But I think to some degree there's a degree of trepidation among some people who say, well, I'm not technical, so I can't play a lead role in this AI transformation. And I think that's an attitude that we need to change. And, I think the technical people do have to play their role in driving that mindset change, because it's you don't have to be technical to play a role in the AI transformation. So there's a few different ways you can go about it. I mean, the first is inspiration. I mentioned that we did a hackathon earlier this week. I think that type of activity, or even just finding some champions inside of your company who are more motivated and maybe more willing to try things out, build some of those POCs or initial use cases in your company that really excite people, and so that your colleagues say, "Wow, like that's amazing! Like, you built that." Yeah, I built it with a little bit of help from IT or data and analytics. I think that's one way to get people excited and realize that this is something that is enterprise wide, not just technology stakeholder wise. I think that you have to have forums for learning. We have office hours in our company, but it can also just be recordings or learning paths. Give people the tools, including sandboxes and playgrounds where they can start to play around with this stuff in a very safe way. And then finally, and this probably really requires top level communication, whether it's HR or even all the way up to the CEO. But this attitude of I'm not technical, I can't be a part of this. That's an attitude that does ultimately need to change. And maybe that sounds harsh, but we can't tolerate that. Just in the same way that 30 years ago, I'm sure some people said, well, I don't know how to use a computer. That's not how I do it. I do pen and paper. We just don't tolerate that anymore. And it's not because we made everyone go out and become a computer scientist. On the contrary, we made people realize you don't need to be a computer scientist to use a computer. Anyone can use Word or PowerPoint or whatever it is. And I would say that AI in many ways is even easier than that. It just requires a level of experience and recognition of what it takes to use these systems effectively. And also, I think it's important, like I said earlier, to have some clear policies in place of this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do, so that people don't have those questions and shy away from it out of fear that they're going to get fired for revealing confidential information.
Absolutely. I guess maybe just a final question for you, because I think you're in a space where you're in a regulated industry. There are implications with data. When it does come to AI and advanced technologies that we're talking about, these LLMs and whatnot, your world might be a little bit more complicated. I'm sure there's other regulated industries too. I mean, what are some of the hurdles, just out of curiosity, that you deal with that maybe somebody else not in a regulated industry would not have to worry about?
Yeah, no, great question. Something that we wrestle with all the time. We have these sort of dual conflicting messages at our company. The first is everyone should be trying to use AI for as much as they can. And then the other message is, but don't put any business confidential or PHI type of data into the AI, which is a lot of what we do. And so how do you navigate that stream? Certainly, any protected health data cannot go into a public LLM like a ChatGPT or any of those tools. And we have guardrails in place to prevent that from happening. Just through our VPN. If someone tries to do that, it'll immediately block them from doing it. So I still think it's an education effort that's involved in that. I think more broadly than just the LLM use is, as I think about sort of the ecosystem of tools that we'll want to do with AI, I increasingly am of the opinion that we probably need to find open source tools that we can deploy within our own secure environment and deploy within our own tenant of Azure that enables us to do these things without sending any data outside of our perimeter. I wish in some ways that we could use every tool in the marketplace, because there's a lot of great ones out there, but a lot of tools basically require you to send their data, and that's just a line we won't cross. Now, I'm sure over time many of these tools will develop virtual private clouds or other ways that we can deploy them more securely, but until we get to that point, we do have to be very careful about what we consider, and any tool would go through a very serious InfoSec, privacy, legal review before we'd allow our employees to use them.
Absolutely. Love it. Dave, I'm sure we have not exhausted the topic. I'm sure we could cover this for a lot longer than we have in this session. If we did spur a question that somebody wanted to hopefully ask as a follow-up, what is a good way of connecting with you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Dave Wollenberg.
Okay, fantastic. Well, there you go. Dave, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Amir. Been a blast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I love if you could share this episode out. I think we're talking about that long tail of AI, identifying those use cases, talked about being in a regulated industry, sitting next to AI agent, and even HR is thinking about that. So Dave unpacked a lot of stuff in there for us, and I thought it was great, and hopefully we'll share that with others that will benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.